Scotland, the iconic homeland of the Loch Ness Monster, our Lord and Saviour Shrek, and unbeknownst to many, a thriving video games ecosystem that deserves more attention. From groundbreaking franchises like Grand Theft Auto, to hidden indie gems like Pine Hearts, Scotland has become an industry leader in the development of culturally rich gaming experiences, as well as inspiring some of gaming's most iconic characters and narratives influenced by Scottish heritage. Now, as a Scot myself, it's always a joy to experience authentic portrayals of Scotland in the media I consume. And for a culture that's often stereotyped or parodied in modern media, it can feel like a rarity to experience positive representation through the medium of video games. I've recently found myself craving more games which showcase the beauty of Scotland and its heritage, and since I couldn't find a video which covered this, I decided to make my own. In this video, I'll be exploring 5 of Scotland's indie game gems which perfectly balance authenticity with immersive storytelling, which are either created by Scottish devs or directly inspired by Scotland's distinctive culture and history. This is my first ever video essay, so I hope you enjoy. Daemonologie, released in 2024 and developed by Edinburgh-based solo indie dev katanalevy, is an indie folk horror journeying through a macabre exploration of the occult, and is directly inspired by the Scottish witch trials of the 17th century. You play as a witchfinder in the year 1674, called to a remote village in Scotland with one goal: to discover which of the townsfolk is the witch, to be sentenced to hanging by nightfall on day 5. Whilst this game is not based on any specific witch trial that actually happened in Scottish history, its themes are influenced by the true-to-life horror of the witch hunts which did occur during this time period and beyond. The game shares the namesake of a real publication made in the late 1500s by King James VI, which endorsed witch hunting and played a part in the development of a major series of witch trials, where around 4,000 to 6,000 people, mostly from the Scottish lowlands, were tried for witchcraft. Judicial torture was frequently used to extract confessions, and this is a theme prominently explored in the game, so this game definitely comes with a warning for the faint of heart. With that said, how reflective is this game of Scottish culture and history more generally? Well, what is instantly evident is the dev's dedication to ensuring the player has an authentic experience with the very Scottish NPCs we encounter throughout the game. The subtitling automatically defaults to Scots English, meaning the townsfolk will faithfully adopt true-to-life Scottish vernacular and slang, which might take some deciphering by non-natives, but which stays true to its roots in each exchange. And if you fall into that category, don't worry, you're provided with a lengthy glossary of translated terms to help you figure out all the colourful language. Fun fact, even one of the characters' names, Firin, means truth in Scottish Gaelic, a Celtic language native to Scotland. I really appreciate that the game's intended experience is through native dialogue, exposing players to a mother tongue they may not otherwise have experienced. I heard directly from katanalevy, solo game developer of Daemonologie, who shared their insights around how their own Scottish heritage influenced the narrative and themes of the game. I'm Scottish from Edinburgh and grew up in Fife. I've had a personal interest in the witch trials in Scotland for years since seeing the site and memorials around when I was younger. I was taking part in a game jam shortly after The Lighthouse came out and wanted to try something in black and white and square aspect ratio, so I thought the witch trials would be a perfect dark subject matter for that style. It was about a year later that I decided to remake the game into a fuller experience for Steam. There are plenty of Scottish references in the game, such as Bothwell's Crossing being a reference to the Earl of Bothwell, and the name of the fisherman being Gaelic for truth. My dad was also a tour bus driver at the time, so I knew I could pick his brains for extra details of the history that I didn't already know. There's also plenty of Scots slang used, and a glossary to help those that were not familiar with the lingo. So what about the game itself? Is it worth a try? For other horror game lovers with a relatively strong stomach, I'm compelled to say yes, and here's why. Design-wise, I was impressed by the surreal stop-motion cutscenes marking the end of each in-game night, plunging the player into distorted and uncanny dream sequences, depicting sinister interpretations of the NPC's storytelling and serving to heighten the player's skepticism around who the witch could be. And beyond the horrors you witness in these nightmares comes an accompaniment of auditory terror, experienced through Daemonologie's enduring OST and gritty sound design. Something that stood out in particular to me was the creation of a foreboding experience in black and white, without excessive use of gore, blood, or other staples in modern horror games which are often over-relied upon. I will say though, even as somebody who is partial to a wee jump scare, I was not fully prepared for how candidly this game would explore the real horrors of Scottish witch hunting history. You will have the option for direct participation in various torture rituals which are inspired by real life events, bringing a deeper and more visceral level of horror, which despite the 2D pixel art style, felt gruesome and honestly left me with a sense of disgust at myself as the witch hunter for participating in such an act. Whilst uncomfortable, the experience is eerily reflective of the scaremongering tactics, widespread superstition and corrupt belief systems surrounding witchcraft in this daunting period in history. A dark retelling of Scotland's past that should be paid due mind. And did I enjoy the game? Well, enjoy certainly doesn't feel like the right term given the nature of the game, but I particularly appreciate how this game broaches an important topic in a raw and uncomfortable way, leaving the player pondering on the subjective nature of truth and reflecting on a harrowing period in history which we should all learn from. It's a short, immersive and interactive horror experience which in my opinion stands out from other horror indies of its calibre. Staying on theme with Scottish-inspired horror is It Sleeps Below the Haar, a short horror exploration game developed by Iona Ferguson of Arborita Games, who originates from Scotland herself. Set in the 50s in a secluded coastal village in northeast Scotland named Kellis Bay, you're a geology student looking to study the curious phenomena occurring there. With the game being set directly in Scotland and created by a Scottish dev, these cultural roots run deep throughout the game's design and narrative. Look no further than the game's name. The term Haar originates from Scots language and means cold and dense coastal fog, particularly in reference to that which rolls in from the North Sea. This fog is a prominent feature in the game, masking visibility and setting an eerie scene throughout. In your dialogue with NPCs, you'll hear regular references about oil drilling, which is reflective of an actual period in Scottish history in the 60s, when Scotland's venture into the oil industry began after the discovery of North Sea oil, leading to an economic boom which transformed Aberdeen into an aptly named oil capital. It Sleeps Below the Haar takes care to achieve authentic representation of Scottish language derivatives and places it at the forefront of the player's experience. Set in Aberdeenshire, the game utilises and references the Doric language, which is used primarily in the northeast of Scotland, and provides the player with an in-game dictionary to consult for better comprehension. One of my favourite and one of the more subtle acknowledgements of the authentic Scottish experience is one NPC's remark that foreigners or tourists always struggle to understand Scottish slang or dialect, something which I'm sure all Scots can relate to. I particularly enjoyed the incorporation of a historic Scottish folk song in the end credits, Lassie with a Yellow Coatie, a light-hearted and melodic piece which delivers an unsettling juxtaposition to the game's unnerving themes.
A mule and jockey, lassie with a yellow coatie, will ye busk and gang with me?
In terms of gameplay, this game is a masterful exploration of both cosmic and atmospheric horror. The themes of this game ooze with Lovecraftian influence. The persistent background music, the thick hanging fog, the interstitial cutscenes left a continuous sense of unknown that left me unnerved. There's just something about a fictitious and isolated Scottish town that screams cosmic horror, and as a gamer who holds Lovecraftian inspired titles close to my heart, this really amplified my enjoyment of the game. A chilling line by one of the island's residents alludes to the cosmic consequences of oil rigging and drilling going on the island. I like to think that the earth fights back in its own ways. Additionally, the Haar acts as a silent mechanic to drive fear and unknown, and while we're never confronted directly by danger, danger itself hangs over the atmosphere, akin to the game's namesake, a harbinger of dread. To learn more about the historic Scottish roots embedded within It Sleeps Below the Haar's narrative, I spoke directly with Iona of Arborita Games to explore Scotland's influence in the game's development. I'm very, very excited to be here chatting with Iona of Arboreta Games, the sole developer of It Sleeps Below the Haar. Iona, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today about your game and particularly about the Scottish culture behind it.
No problem. Yeah, it's really interesting that you're doing this project.
As a Scot myself, I'm a huge fan of games set in Scotland. I'm sure you are as well. But I also love horror games, and particularly those which explore elements of cosmic horror, which your game does. What was it that influenced you to choose Scotland and this specific location and setting for the game?
I think it just made sense. So kind of all three games I've done, so and the Black Iris before It Sleeps Below the Har, It Sleeps, and then the one I'm working on just now are all set in kind of the northeast of Scotland. So I'm from Aberdeen. I live in the West Coast now, but that's kind of around where I grew up. So I think it just made sense from a perspective of it's an area that I know, especially since It Sleeps was an open world game. I wanted to be able to have some of the like the coastal stuff and the forest stuff, and I just thought it made a lot more sense to base it in a place that I know. Like I know what kind of trees there are, I know what kind of rocks there are, that sort of thing. Um, but I think it's also just wanting to see where we live reflected in games. I think there's a lot of kind of cinema that's done a really good job of that. Like movies like Under the Skin and stuff like that that kind of portray Scotland really well. And just kind of realistically, like that's what it looks like. But that's not really been reflected in games. So I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to just sort of show off what it's like to live here, what it looks like, what it sounds like, all that sort of thing. And I think I'm just bored of playing games that are set in America.
I can absolutely relate to you, and I really like what you said about cinema having done a great job of already of representing Scotland, and I think that games is another medium where we can always do with more representation. And speaking of the landscapes, the forestry, coastal areas, how did you utilize those true to life elements from places that you've seen and that you've lived within to create a feeling of, I guess, like eldritch dread, cosmic horror?
So I'm from the city. Like I've always kind of lived in the city, up until maybe oh, almost 9 or 10 years ago. I kind of moved out further into the country, and I think I had that sort of panic that a lot of people who are from the city have when they kind of move further out. Um, but I think that's something that's kind of crept into my game design. This sort of like relationship with nature sort of thing, and being someone who's sort of not grew up in that environment. My partner, for example, she's kind of grown up in the country and has a completely different relationship with kind of woods and stuff like that than to me. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I think part of it's also what you mentioned about a lot of the games and also movies as well about Scotland do tend to be this very sort of almost like romanticized depiction of like a beautiful green place, which it is,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it's also quite um hostile and inhospitable, especially coming from like the northeast, like being right next to the Cairngorms and stuff like that, which is a very beautiful place, but it's also very terrifying. And if
Yeah.
you make the wrong decision, you will die.
Yep.
Um, and also, being from it's the seaside, like growing up kind of like on the northeast coast as well. There was also a lot of growing up. There was a lot of tales and stuff about the sea, to be careful around the sea and all of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and like lots of sort of folklore around that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's trying to meld the sort of like I do think Scotland is a beautiful place. Um, I also just don't really relate to the very sort of like Disneyified portrayal of Scotland, and I think that has its place. But I feel like that's kind of all we've had.
And yeah, obviously you have a lot of experience of Scotland, different areas of Scotland, city living, country living. What was the experience like of researching for the game, if any? Like, did you learn anything surprising or unexpected about Scottish culture, heritage, or history?
Yeah, so I think that's with kind of all of my games. There's a huge amount of research that kind of goes into them, and this one especially, both from kind of the researching a lot more about sort of coastal stuff. So researching a lot about kind of fishermen and that kind of folklore around Scotland, which I knew a bit of. Like, grew up around lots of people that kind of fished and stuff like that. But also just the time period as well. So it's kind of set in the sort of um middle of last century, just kind of like just before the oil boom in the Northeast. So researching a lot about kind of what that was like in that transition from kind of Aberdeen and the surrounding area being a relatively kind of poor place, and
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly having all of this wealth, and kind of what that did culturally. Um, there's just endless stuff you can read about that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the main stuff I was really interested to learn about was sort of what life was like on fishing boats. Even up till kind of quite recently, there's a lot of interesting like stories and folklore and stuff like that. I think my favorite little tidbit that I learned that I didn't actually get to put in the game, but I really did want to find a way to get it in, but I couldn't. Um, there was apparently a tradition where if people were kind of out on boats overnight and long periods of time, would kind of sing songs to each other over the radio, or would have like church services and stuff like over the radio, because obviously you can't be together literally, but
Mm-hmm.
you could kind of be together in this sort of way of communicating. And the like the radio plays a big part in the game and all of that sort of thing. So I've tried to kind of like pull all these little bits together.
That's amazing. I think the best part about it is the subtlety of the folklore and like the references that come through. It's interesting for somebody who is Scottish and might pick up on some of these things, but it's also intriguing for folks who maybe don't have that background understanding. As a Scot, we've talked a little bit about accurately representing Scotland. How important was it for you to accurately and authentically portray elements of Scottish culture, whether it be the folklore or even just like the landscape itself, if it looked like a tree that you would see round about Aberdeen?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I'm a huge fan of kind of historical fiction generally, like Robert Eggers movies like The Witch and The Lighthouse and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that are
Love.
a huge influence. And I think that's almost the sort of the selling point of my games is the kind of the vibes. There's
Mm-hmm.
there's
Love the
there's
vibes.
there's not that much to do kind of mechanically, but what you're kind of giving to the player is an experience of like kind of a slice of this place in this time as accurately as I can portray it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the one thing I really did want to kind of get right is the language. Because I mean, you'll know living in Scotland, we have such a diversity of language, both in terms of like how we speak English, but also how we speak Scots, and then
Mm-hmm.
up in the northeast we've got Doric as well, which is kind of its own thing. Um, and getting that across, I think, is the most important thing, and it's really difficult as well because obviously it's not a lot of it is understandable if you're not from here, but a lot of it isn't, and
Yeah.
it's not like if you make a game in Spanish, you can just wholesale translate it to English, and it doesn't really work as easily with kind of Scots or Doric or even like kind of Scottish English.
Yeah.
Um, so I think portraying that realistically was quite important, and trying to get across how people sort of switch how they speak to different people. Like for example, the player is kind of an outsider who's come to this place, so people kind of talk to you in a sort of toned down
Mm-hmm.
language. Like they wouldn't use certain words or that kind of thing, which I think is reflective of just how we are. Like
Mm-hmm.
moving from the kind of northeast down to the west coast, you stop using certain words and certain phrases because people just aren't going to understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the same the other way around to me. And that's something I think is not super well portrayed in anything really. And I think it's often like a punchline, like oh the Scot is kind of unintelligible,
Yeah.
which it is kind of true. Like it is true at times, and that's a funny thing to explore. But it's not the kind of doesn't encompass everything about it. So yeah, I think the accuracy was very important overall. And there's only so much I can do as a solo developer, especially with the kind of the modeling and stuff like that. Like my background is in coding and stuff like that. I'm a much better modeler now than I was, but there's certain things that it's just quite difficult to sort of portray. So I think you need to sort of pick your battles and say, well, that looks close enough. It's maybe not quite the right flower or whatever.
One thing that you would like to stay with players who have experienced the wonder of It Sleeps Below the Heart, because as you say, it's very much a slice of like an experience of the past. What is something you would love players to take away?
I think the main thing I want people to take away is just that they've sat with this for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and it's just kind of gone by, and they've been immersed in this world for a few hours, and they've maybe forgotten about the thing they were stressed about. They've forgotten about the deadline tomorrow or whatever it might be. It sounds kind of very like cliched, but I think that's kind of why we do this kind of thing. It's to it's to do all the stuff we've said. It's to get across certain parts of culture. It's to talk about my own experiences, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I would like people to have just sort of been immersed in this world to an extent that they've been able to just kind of enjoy themselves and not worry about stuff for a couple of hours. But speaking more specifically to like the kind of Scottish culture elements, is I would love if people played it and then afterwards they were like, oh, maybe I'll look up like the northeast of Scotland. I'll look up Aberdeen. I'll look up kind of some of the history about it. Just being able to give people that sort of foot in the door to sort of like beyond surface level, like shortbread tartan Scotland.
Yes.
Like, 'cause I think there's so much interesting to talk about and so much interesting to learn, especially if you're interested in like stuff like folklore or even the kind of the environmental stuff like geology or whatever, that kind of thing. There's endless stuff you can learn about Scotland. So if it leads someone to sort of be a bit more kind of curious about this place, that would be amazing. And I think like you said, just being able to dispel some of the sort of tropes that have built up over the years would be really nice. And I think overall in media that's getting so much better. But I think in games we're kind of lagging behind. So if I can chip away at that a little bit, I'll be very happy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that's important. And I think a short game like this one, it gives like a little window or like a little sprinkle of intrigue. And I think that will definitely encourage people to, do a little quick Google search of some of these Scottish terms or Scottish places that we reference the game. So I think that's amazing. So any similar projects coming up that you want to talk about, and where can folks find you if they want to learn more about what you have coming up next?
So if people want to find me, Instagram's probably the easiest one. I'm very kind of social media avoidant, but I do still have an Instagram, so that's just our Borata Games on Instagram. Or on itch.io and Steam and stuff like that as well. I do kind of keep on top of those things, so if people leave a comment or whatever, I can get back to people. New projects. So I've got a new game coming out in a few weeks. Hopefully, if I don't need to push it back, but it should be fine. Called Unto the Aurora. So this is also another game set in Scotland. This is set in the late 1500s in Scotland, and it's a sailing game. So you're playing as a person who has been convicted of witchcraft and is going to be executed, and you escape on a sailboat across this kind of ocean stretch towards a safe island. And the game is you sort of sailing the boat and visiting various places on the way. But if people have enjoyed It Sleeps or the Black Iris before it, hopefully they'll enjoy this. There's still a lot of kind of cosmic horror elements. Obviously a lot of kind of Scottish culture from a long time ago, but still the same kind of vibes as the other games. Hopefully if people are fans of what's come before, they'll enjoy this.
That's so exciting. As soon as I heard that your new one was going to be based in Scotland and horror based, I was like, yep, Steam wishlist. So I'm very much looking forward to that releasing as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say a huge thank you again for your time and all the best with your future work. So there you have it. For any fans of horror, particularly of the Eldritch variety, you won't be left disappointed by It Sleeps Below the Haar. Now onto my game of the year for 2024, Still Wakes the Deep, developed by the Chinese Room and published by Secret Mode. This is a first-person psychological horror game set in the 1970s where you play as Kaz McCleary, an electrician on an oil rig called the Beara, situated on the North Sea in Scotland. What appears to be a typical working day as an electrician transpires into disaster, plunging you into an otherworldly and perilous sequence of events to survive against eldritch monstrosities. What brought this game to life for me was the authentic world building and environmental design. The exact setting of the oil rig is reflective of the time within which the game is set, with the actual establishment of Scotland's oil infrastructure occurring in the 60s and 70s, where North Sea waters became a focal point for oil exploration. The game's setting drips with grey and gloom, an atmosphere constructed by the devs to incite a feeling of what we call dreich, a dreary and bleak state, particularly in reference to the weather. The game's director is Scottish, which I'm sure played a huge part in ensuring the character dialect and colloquialisms are relatable, accurate and immersive.
I run a tight ship. Do you understand me? A tight ship.
Technically, it's no shit.
Shut your gob, you Ned prick!
Additionally, Scots culture is also woven into the sound design. The end credits feature a traditional folk song, the title of which translates to "Being Here Has Caused My Sorrow." Now, this song is performed by Maggie McInnes, originally sung by her mother Flora McNeil, a professional Gaelic folk singer. The song evokes emotions of isolation, a yearning for home, and just drips with tragic beauty, the perfect thematic match to the game itself. Other true-to-life references to Scottish culture are found in the various nooks and crannies where classic Scottish Easter eggs are hiding, particularly in the very beginning of the game. In Kaz's rig cabin, there's a Partick Thistle FC football scarf, which is one of Glasgow's oldest football clubs. In the Englishman's cabin, you'll find a Put Britain's First National Front poster, reflective of the contrast in political climate between UK countries at the time, and you'll even find a sneaky reference to Scottish comedian Lemmy in the end credits. Benny Harvey RIP. Of particular merit is how this game offers an authentic representation of Scottish grassroots language and culture, capitalising on the abrasive and self-deprecating humour of Scottish folk that we all know and love.
Aye. A happy new year to you too, you cunt.
The game really comes to life through its characters. The dialogue is wrought with expletives, slang and traditional expressions that make you feel right at home. Scottish voice actors from the Isle of Skye, Dundee, Aberdeen and Glasgow were recruited, including Scottish legends Alec Newman and Karen Dunbar. The game is so inherently Scottish that even the game's subtitles can be adapted for those unfamiliar with the vernacular. So for those who want the full Scots slang experience, make sure to switch to English UK subtitles. Most strikingly in my opinion is the fact that the game offers Scottish Gaelic as a language option. This effort is impressive given that Scottish Gaelic is only utilised by around 1% of the Scottish population and has sadly been on the decline for many years due to various cultural and systemic factors. This feels like a simple yet effective gesture to help reinvigorate declining aspects of Scottish culture and help resurface and remind of Scotland's deep political history. The game even offers you a trophy if you complete the game in this setting. So for platinum hunters and completionists alike, this inclusion acts as a veiled nudge in the direction to explore and acknowledge a culture unbeknownst to you in order to reach 100% completion, which I actually find quite moving. This is the first time I've seen Scottish Gaelic as a language option, and whilst I don't speak the language myself, I do credit the devs and publishers for including an important aspect of Scottish history which could have easily been overlooked, but which ultimately provides valuable exposure to Scotland's rich culture to those who otherwise may not have experienced it at all. Placing Scottish culture aside for a moment, this game itself is incredible. The environment and sound design is pulsing with life, despite the tragic circumstances surrounding the protagonist. The short format was immersive, and the inability to fight back and instead run away only feeds the vulnerability and sense of danger. I appreciated the linearity of structure, a story-driven experience consistently driving the narrative home. And like I've already mentioned, I'm a huge horror game fan, and Still Wakes the Deep is a gruesome treat. It is the epitome of cosmic horror, flooded with Lovecraftian inspiration. From the grotesque entities pursuing the protagonist, to the descent of the vast oil rig into a claustrophobic wreck, Still Wakes the Deep has the player sinking in an unknowable ocean of eldritch dread. I could honestly do a whole other video talking just about this topic, so let me know if you'd be interested in that too. In my opinion, Still Wakes the Deep is a touchstone for Scottish representation in modern media and not to be missed. Its impact has been acknowledged via multiple award nominations and wins, including scooping 3 well-deserved BAFTA Games Awards in 2025. The DLC, Siren's Rest, released fairly recently, and it's actually set 11 years after the happenings in the base game, and I highly recommend checking it out. Now, shifting the tone away from horror to something more light-hearted, let's look at another highly acclaimed game, A Highland Song, a rhythm-based platformer adventure game with light survival elements, developed and published by Inco Studios. The game's narrative follows Moira, a teenage girl, as she traverses the mountainous terrain of the Scottish Highlands in pursuit of her uncle Hamish's lighthouse, along the way gathering puzzle pieces of a story rich with Scottish history and mythology. Naturally, A Highland Song incorporates the use of traditional Scottish Gaelic dialect and charming voice acting from Scottish voice actors to bring the characters and their stories to life.
My little brother taught me to climb. Kept getting himself stuck up a tree or on a roof. Not like my mum would get her fat arse up there to get him back.
You'll also find references to Scottish folklore, mythology and history throughout, sharpening the authenticity of the gaming experience. Narrative director John Ingold was keen to reflect the authenticity and true-to-life experiences of Scottish people throughout history, and in doing so, scattered throughout the game are snippets of information about various aspects of Scottish lore. From William Wallace, a well-known historic figure, to folklore and mythology, like the shape-shifting creatures we know as Selkies. The narrative is further enriched by incorporating organic Scottish influence in the development of the game's soundtrack and art style. The original music score was brought to life by Lawrence Chapman alongside Scottish folk scene giants, Talisk and Fourth Moon. Additionally, the game's Scottish art director, Paul Scott Canavan, depicts the peaks and troughs of the lush Scottish landscape with a unique painterly style. What I find most charming about this game are the subtle nods to Scottish native humour in the dialogue that Moira has with the other NPCs, including a cheeky wee slight on Edinburgh natives that made my Glasgow heart skip a beat. The Scottish landscape feels like the perfect setting for a Highland Song story, one of finding oneself amongst the vast landscape surrounding us which we grew up in but may be growing out of. Rhythm games have never been my forte, however I loved how seamlessly the rhythm elements were, providing connective tissue between game locations as you traverse further from home. The music itself is vibrant and catchy, bringing century-old tales and secrets to life through the upbeat melodies. I heard directly from Joseph Humphrey, indie developer and co-founder of Inco Studios, who shared what inspired him to bring the beauty of Scotland to life in digital form. Why Scotland for us? I grew up there and a fantastic teacher used to take us on Highland walking and camping trips. I've always loved that landscape, but nostalgia played a big part too. After university, I moved to England for my first games job at Rare, and over time I found myself missing Scotland more and more, especially with a young family who aren't as keen on hill walking as I am. What I wanted most was to capture the feel of the Highlands. Many people know alpine landscapes, sharp peaks, endless forests, but Scotland's are something else. Heavy, rounded mountains that often feel darker and more imposing, despite their smaller scale. And the sight of purple heather across a hillside is unforgettable. The other big inspiration was modern Scottish folk music, especially bands like Talisk and Fourth Moon. At school, Scottish country dancing always felt a bit twee to me, but today's folk scene is bursting with energy and creativity. Talisk in particular are at the forefront, blending electronic dance influences and carving out something completely new. So it was a huge privilege to be able to include Talisk and Fourth Moon's music in a Highland Song. If you're looking for a narrative rich in culture, a Highland Song is not to be skipped over. If you're ready for an emotional journey through the Scottish Highlands, then Farewell North could be for you. Oh, and did I mention you literally get to play as a dog? Developed by Edinburgh-based Kyle Banks and published by Moon Eye Studios in 2024, Farewell North is an open-world exploration game where you play as main character Kayleigh, a Scottish lass who embarks on a heartfelt adventure alongside her border collie companion Chesley. As you traverse vast Scottish landscapes and seemingly endless lochs, the narrative immerses you in equally heartwarming and complex themes and writes a love letter to Scotland itself. The game is set in a fictional depiction of Scotland's Orkney Islands, but makes reference to several true-to-life locations throughout the game, my favourite being a trio of authentic Scottish Munros. The Three Sisters of Glencoe, which you can actually climb as side quests. You'll also find this game sprinkled with true-to-life Scottish cultural references. For example, finding puffins and sea lions on some of the coastal areas in the games, where you can actually find them in Scotland. Additionally, the fragments of the poem that you collect to complete your journal summates to Hearts in the Highlands, a song and poem written by the famous Robert Rabbie Burns in 1789. One standout feature of this game for me is the inclusion of Scotland's founding language Gaelic in the game's subtitling to help the player feel immersed in the main character's history. With around only 1% of Scottish people still using this language today, the decision to include Gaelic felt significant, providing both exposure to and preservation of this historic language in what feels like a very unintrusive way to the player. The Gaelic language is explored intricately throughout this game, from the Gaelic language subtitle option to the Gaelic naming of in-game areas, to learning the true meaning of the main character's name, Kayleigh, to be Kayleigh, which in Gaelic means gathering, party, or if you're Scottish yourself, the dreaded high school dances that you hated participating in. In terms of the narrative, I thoroughly enjoyed how Farewell North carries the player through the journey alongside Kayleigh and Chesley. As we navigate the foreboding landscapes of the archipelago, we are orienteering through the complexity of grief and loss, releasing oneself from the shackles of grief through reliving warm memories facilitated by your furry companion. It's a heartfelt exploration, leaving not a dry eye in the house, with a beautiful accompanying soundtrack to boot. To learn more about the Scottish inspiration behind Farewell North, I spoke with Kyle Banks, the game's developer. I'm so excited to be here chatting with Kyle Banks, the developer of Farewell North. Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today about your game, and particularly about the Scottish culture behind it. Would you like to give us just a brief intro to yourself and your game?
So my name's Kyle Banks. Like you said, I'm the developer of this game, Farewell North, which is a game that's kind of an emotional adventure through the Orkney Islands up north in Scotland. But it's kind of like inspired by all of Scotland to kind of bring all of that to kind of the geography of Orkney. And you play as a border collie, and your goal is to restore color to your human's world.
I absolutely loved the fact that you could play as a dog. I feel like not many games offer that experience, so that was one thing that definitely drew me to your game. And as a Scot myself, I'm definitely a little bit biased, but I feel like Scotland is such a gorgeous country, and more games should definitely be including Scotland in their development. So I was really thrilled when I started playing Farewell North and saw that Scotland was depicted so authentically in the game. So I'd love to hear from you. What was it about Scotland that just felt like the right fit for the world building around the game's narrative?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I don't sound it, but I do live in Scotland. I've lived here for 5 or 6 years now. And so the kind of inspiration of the game was my wife and I had kind of moved here from Canada. We, traveled for a little bit, and then we got our first flat in February of 2020. And then like a month later, COVID happened and everything was locked down. And so we had all these plans to kind of explore Scotland that kind of had to get pulled on hold for quite a while. So the game kind of became this outlet to kind of like explore the country in a different way through like research and all that. And obviously when the country opened up to then, give me an excuse to go out to the Highlands and get a lot of like photo references and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was just kind of like a personal way to kind of explore the country and just continue to kind of fall in love with the country through that project. And yeah, hopefully that kind of came through with the end result.
100%. Yeah, I definitely feel like obviously living in Scotland, there are so many places that you can see yourself in through the game, but I actually also felt like I was exploring somewhere completely new. And to be honest, I haven't actually done a lot of traveling myself throughout Scotland, so it definitely inspired me to go up north and do a little bit more traveling. So definitely came through.
Awesome.
Yeah. And one sort of more, speaking about the actual game itself, one standout feature of this game for me was the inclusion of Scotland's founding language Gaelic. So in the game subtitling, it really helps the player feel immersed in the character's history, which I thought was really important. And I'm sure you're aware, and maybe the audience are not, that only 1% of Scottish people still use Gaelic language today. I actually don't speak it myself, but I found it really significant to have, Gaelic included. So I'd love to hear from you. Why was it so important to you to pay homage to Scotland's oldest language? And were there actually any challenges in implementing that within your game?
Yeah, so that was something that was kind of like a dream to include kind of all throughout development, but it actually didn't happen until like the final couple weeks. And there's a few reasons for that, but the reason I wanted to kind of incorporate that was, like you said, only 1% of people in the country speak it, and it's a beautiful language, and it kind of like so much of the country is named, takes names from Gaelic, but none of us know what it means,
Right.
right? So it was kind of, just something like personally that I found really interesting, and I wanted to include. And then of course we also have Kaylee, the main human character. Her name comes from the Gaelic Kaylee, which is like the dance and the social event and all that. And there's a little like kind of side quest you can discover in the game to that kind of goes into that. But yeah, so it was kind of something that was like kind of always a bit of a dream to include. But it's the challenge was, the more niche a language is, the less people who speak it, the more expensive it is to translate to that language. And so we were working with a localization firm, and obviously they didn't have a Gaelic person kind of on hand to do that. So it actually took them like a few weeks to find anyone who like in their network who could do the translation and review the translation and all that. And so I'd kind of given up on this dream, thinking it probably wasn't going to happen. And it was actually my publisher who was like, we think this would actually be really cool. And so they were the kind of ones that were like at the last minute, like we have this idea to include it as like a second subtitle. What do you think? Can we kind of squeeze this in? And so we kind of had this last minute push to get it in. I'm really glad we did. I'm really proud of that feature. And I don't, from a business sense, it probably doesn't make sense, but I think from a cultural and artistic sense, like I'm really proud of that. I think it was really cool to do.
I couldn't agree more. I think, the authenticity of this game is what makes it interesting and makes it stand out, especially for me as somebody who, again, is from Scotland and likes to see my culture reflected in media. And I think that was an amazing step forward into making that possible, even though it wasn't easy. So I definitely think you should absolutely be proud of having that included. So cool.
Yeah, and I think like the response to that was really cool. Even people outside of Scotland, I think I don't have like analytics, but just anecdotally, like pretty much everyone plays with that second subtitle enabled. So for those who don't know, it's like you have your main subtitle in English or French or German or whatever, and you have an option to include Gaelic beneath that, and almost everyone keeps that enabled and plays through the game with that, and I just think that's really cool.
Absolutely. Just adds a new layer of like, it's also very unintrusive. Like, as you said, it's optional, you can choose, but I think it's a really nice way of, I guess, like I said, paying homage and like giving a little bit of exposure to a language that people may not really know more about. So yeah, it's awesome. Really appreciate that. And yeah, Farewell North, it does explore through many different mediums the heartwarming themes of love and companionship, but there's also a lot of complex themes, including navigating loss, the complexities of grief. So something that stood out to me and that I found very interesting was how, as a player, you could feel the duality of those emotions depending on where you were in the game. So the vastness of the Scottish landscapes could feel both comforting and also daunting depending on Kaylee's storyline and how that was progressing. So I just wanted to ask you, like, how did you utilize the environment, music, sound design, gameplay mechanics to just help navigate those really important topics?
Yeah, I think the kind of core mechanic of the game, the restoring color to the world, is kind of, from day one, that was kind of always a metaphor for you as the dog and how you're perceiving your human's kind of emotional state. And so you're playing as the dog, Chesley, but he's kind of more of a supporting character. He's not really the main character of the story. Kaylee's the main character, but your job is to kind of empathize with her and to like, find ways to bring her little sparks of joy and help her kind of work through, these more complex themes that she's going through. And so, yeah, I think it kind of started with that. It started with that kind of metaphor and kind of building on top of that. And then John Konsolakis, who's the composer on the project, just incredible talent. And he kind of ran with that. He saw the vision from like day one, ran with that, and built a soundtrack around it that just like, amplified and completely took everything to another level. And he wasn't just there to put music on top of a scene. He was involved. He was credited as an additional writer. He really helped me work through some of the thematic elements as well, and seeing how we can kind of like tie music and even gameplay and all that kind of stuff into it to help support those themes. And I think when I was playing the game, I kind of had this dream of like, if a player plays it a second time, I wanted there to be a whole bunch of things for them to kind of like recontextualize and see in kind of a new light. So when you play through the game the first time, it all kind of like leads to a culmination and you kind of understand it and everything. But when you play it a second time, I think it kind of takes on a new light, and you see things from a very different perspective. And I think that's been really interesting from the people who have played it a second time to kind of like share their experience and hear from people how, little things that seemed, completely self-explanatory took on an entirely different meaning on the second look. So that's been really rewarding as well.
That's brilliant. I'll definitely need to replay and see if those themes stand out to me. I'm sure they will. But yeah, I definitely feel the music was one of my favorite parts actually of the game, and I felt like that really drove home some of the emotions that you were trying to express through Kaylee and Chesley's journey. So I absolutely, can I find the OST for that anywhere? Because I would absolutely, yeah, it's available.
Yeah. So it's available on Spotify, YouTube, like all
Amazing.
that, and it's also available on Steam.
Well, there you go, guys. Definitely go and check that out because it's so amazing. Lovely to listen to. And yeah, something else that, I've spoke a lot about authenticity and reflecting real life elements of Scottish culture. And I think that Farewell North does that surprisingly well. World building, locations, names and cultural references. One of my favourite parts was when it's Hogmanay and, the fireworks are going off. And it's actually quite like a stressful time for Chesley and Kaylee, but it was just really intriguing to me that, that's something that I can relate to and in life, so I think that's something that I would love to hear from you. What was the experience like of researching Scotland for the game? So obviously you've lived there, but did you have any surprises or unexpected things that you learned about Scottish culture as you were researching for the game?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot specifically to do with Orkney. So originally the game wasn't so kind of concretely set in Orkney. It kind of was just general Scottish islands, and we were kind of like taking bits from all over Scotland and kind of bringing them to this like island setting. But more and more as I was doing research, I found out like just how fascinating Orkney is as a place in the real world, and the history there, and from Vikings to feral sheep to like all kinds of just like fascinating history, and some of that still persists today. So yeah, I'm trying to think of like a specific example. I think at one point of the game there's it's optional, but we learned that Kaylee when she lived in the islands did some like summer jobs like a tour guide, and she kind of takes us on a tour through one of the islands, and that was a lot of fun to research and find like just kind of like cherry picking some interesting bits from Orkney's history to kind of include on her little tour through the island. Yeah, and I mentioned this already, the feral sheep. I just think it's fascinating that there's Orkney has the North Ronaldsay sheep, which are like unique in that they evolved to eat seaweed for very interesting reasons. And yeah, we kind of like got to loosely depict them in the game a little bit, hint at them a bit, but yeah, just like so many little interesting tidbits from Orkney.
I have to say the feral sheep was news to me as well, so definitely learning really interesting facts about Scotland's history myself, so that was really cool. And of course, a huge part of Farewell North's success so far has just been how relatable it feels to the community and just the story's impact on the player. There's both positive emotion that comes from it, but meaningful reflection on, like I said, the complexities of grief, loss, all of these important themes. And I wanted to ask you if there's one takeaway that you would like to stay with players who have experienced the wonder of Farewell North.
I think, Farewell North's obviously like a heavy game. It can be very sad. A lot of players cry while playing it, but we never set out to make a game that was just like sad for the sake of being sad. It was always meant to be uplifting. And I think if I like distilled the entire game down to like a single word, it would probably be about acceptance is kind of the theme of the game. And so yeah, I think that's what I hope players take away from it. And when I watch people play it or watch streams or hear from people, like not everyone like leaves it feeling that. Sometimes they do leave it in a more sad place, but I think overall it seems like the response has been that people do leave the game feeling more optimistic and uplifted, which is that was kind of always the hope that people would.
I definitely can relate to that. I definitely had a little tear, a little cry, but I definitely left feeling, like a warmth there. And I think that definitely comes through all the different elements that are explored. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, just to finish up, do you have any projects coming up soon that you'd want to share, and where can folks find you to learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I'm very hard at work on my next project. I haven't announced it yet. It couldn't possibly be more different from Feral North, so I'm very scared to announce it, but I'm also very excited. But it's still probably a few months away from being able to share any details concretely on that. But yeah, probably towards the end of this year, we'll announce that and hopefully have a demo and get it out for people to check it out. So I'm really excited, really scared about that. But in the meantime, you can find me on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Blue Sky, all those. It's usually Kyle W. Banks is my handle.
Wonderful. Well, I'll be keeping my eyes peeled for the announcement on your new project. Can't wait to see what's next. But yeah, just wanted to say a huge thank you again for your time and all the best with the future work you're doing. So, on reflection of the incredible games listed in this video, it's clear that Scottish history and culture plays a major role in influencing the incredible stories that we're lucky enough to immerse ourselves in through the medium of video games. Whilst there's still a long way to go when it comes to furthering representation for Scottish devs, actors and game makers in the industry, these indie gems really do showcase the true potential of Scotland's influence in the gaming space, and honestly, more studios should take a leaf out of their book when it comes to authentic representation of culture through games. Thank you so much for watching my first video essay, and if there are other Scottish games or games set in Scotland that you think I should cover, please share them in the comments and let me know which one from my list you'll be checking out. I do also stream over on Twitch and upload frequent Let's Play episodes on this channel, so feel free to check those out if you're interested in more content like this. Thanks for watching.